All right. It is 6 o'clock. Welcome to MRA's third Thursday for July. I'd like to toss this over to Allison Sheets, MRA President, for any announcements that you may have, Allison.
Hey, going first. Welcome everybody to our third Thursday for July. I think most of us are feeling that the rescue season has started, and certainly the wildfire season has started. I don't think there is a wildfire season. I think it's all year round anymore. I only have just a couple announcements, actually just one really administrative announcement. For those of you who were not at the Flagstaff conference and the business meeting or haven't heard, we are going to be doing a major change with the way the Mountain Rescue Association carries on its business meetings. We are getting rid of proxy voting. It's kind of a big deal. And the reason we're doing this is to be compliant with the rules of nonprofits in the state of Washington where we are incorporated. And it's not just a matter of going to a different state. This is pretty much across the board rules for the way board of directors do their business, is that proxy voting is not allowed. So in the business meeting in Flagstaff, the board of directors decided that we would go ahead and just eliminate proxy voting. It isn't necessarily the end result. We may still make some changes going forward, but in February, we will be voting to make our bylaws and policies compliant with this elimination of proxy voting. So look for some information on that. There will be a brief mention in the Meridian coming out as well. You should be getting the minutes to that meeting to review prior to February. And then for any bylaw change, if you didn't know, you have to have announcement of that bylaw change at least 60 days prior to when the vote would actually take place. So we will be getting those bylaw and policy changes out to the general membership prior to at least 60 days, if not more, prior to the February voting. And if this is causing you stress or you don't like these issues, I've heard some grumblings about it, it is kind of no choice. We're going to be compliant with the laws of nonprofits. But if you do have things that you want to change in the way the MRA works, either in policies or bylaws, by all means, go for it. Get some consensus, get other people from your team, other people from your region, talk to your region chairs. And if you want something on the agenda to affect change, you make it happen. We're totally willing to take new topics to an agenda for any of our business meetings. And with that, I will turn it back to Carrie to introduce Mike Lamonaco, Carpinteria rockstar, I guess is what he is, and he'll give his own introduction. So thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about wildfire safety for search and rescue.
Thank you, Allison. So as Allison said, Mike's going to give us a talk on wildfire safety for search and rescue. Just a reminder to go ahead and please chat your questions as they come up in the chat, and then we'll take some time. We'll make sure we have at least 10 or 15 minutes of time to go through any questions that you might have. And with that being said, I'll turn that over to Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, everybody else who decided to take their afternoon and join me, or evening, I guess, depending on where you could be. So, as they said, my name is Mike Lamonaco. I'm going to hopefully get this to move forward here. There we go. A little about myself, just to get out there in the open right away before Carrie picks on me too much. Most of you might remember my name because I was a CMC catalog rescue model. The sombrero, one of the most popular things I think out there. So now that we've got that out, you guys can all take a deep breath. You know who I am. I'm not that big a celebrity. We can kind of focus in on what we're going to deal with. Just a little about me. I was with Santa Barbara County Sheriff Search and Rescue Team for about 11 years. I was an active rescue member. I was on their one of their ICs as well as a board member. I also spent some time with Santa Paula City Fire as a firefighter and an engineer. From there, I also taught at a local fire academy. I got off the engine and went into fire inspections with Ventura County Fire, where I spent about 5 years. And then 5-6 years ago, I landed in Carpinteria, Summerlin, which is in Santa Barbara County. I'm currently the fire marshal and one of the arson investigators for our district. So the goal today is to basically kind of give you guys an overview of what's going on in the world when you're out there in a wildfire doing evacuation, kind of the 30,000 foot level of what's going on around you also. Because I know sometimes as a search and rescue team, you're kind of removed from what everything else is going on. And part of this is to go through some definitions, take a little bit of the mystery out of there. So if you hear traffic coming across, you're like, okay, I know what that is. I know what to expect. It'll just take some of the mystery away. We'll talk a little bit about PPE, personal protective equipment, kind of what you have. And part of what this whole slideshow is about in this presentation is to get you guys thinking about how are you doing things? How are other people doing things? I'm not saying what I'm telling you is the absolute, this is what you must do, but we're going to talk options. We're going to just kind of open up doors for you to think about how you can maybe better yourselves when you're out there. After PPE, we'll hit fire behavior. So fire behavior is like a week-long class in the fire world. So we're going to kind of condense it, take some nuts and bolts, give you guys kind of the basics, just again, some overall situational awareness to help you out. Briefly hit just some of the common factors that we're finding with fatality fires where things have gone wrong. Again, then we'll hit the 10s and 18s. I'll explain what those are. They're kind of some lookouts and watchouts, hazards, best practices, and then it's going to be open up for Q&A. And I don't have any problems if we want a Q&A as we go. I know sometimes that works better for people's brains rather than try to remember it at the end. So we can kind of do it either way. Carrie, I'm going to kind of leave that up to you if you want to interject here or there with a question. Again, don't feel bad if you do it. So as we go into definitions. So a couple of the more common ones, and again, there are hundreds of them out there. So I just want to hit the ones that kind of make a little bit of sense, might help you guys understand. If you're hearing radio traffic chatter coming out and you're going into an area and they're talking about, you know, a backfire, a crown, things like that, this is what they are. So a backfire or a burnout, this is an intentionally set fire. The fire department is out there, they've got line in an area, they're going to set a fire to basically burn out an area in between the front of the fire that's coming towards it or potentially on the sides. But the goal is to use fire to burn out an area to take, I'd say, the wind out of the sails if we use other terms, but that's the goal. So if you hear that, you're going to see a lot more fire activity, and a lot of people start to freak out. The phone starts to ring, but it's being done on purpose. A lot more smoke, a lot more fire. If you go, I know Northern California, Colorado, a lot of areas like that, you see a lot of crown fires. So these are big trees where you can actually be down on the ground and see zero fire whatsoever, but the fire is actually up in the top of the trees and working its way independently. So you could have surface winds blowing out of the east where your crown fire is actually going with winds out of the west and going opposite of what you're feeling down at the bottom. So we don't see as much down here in Southern California, but it's something to be aware of because, again, we never know where we're going to be sent. So just if you hear people talking crown fire on the radio, your head should be on a swivel. Where am I? What's above me? What's going on? Divisions are a term we use in the fire service. So we geographically break the fire up. So if you're being sent to an area and you're hearing talk of Division Zulu, well, that's something to learn before you get out of the command post. If you're going to an area, what division does that fall in? Because they're going to have their own TAC channels. There will be things going on specific to that division that you're not going to pick up unless you have a different radio frequency. So just things to be aware of how we break stuff off. And there will be a separate division chief running that specific area who you may need to tie in with, where it won't actually go back to the command post. It'll be that specific division is kind of running their own show. So just things to look into there. Escape route seems fairly self-explanatory, but the big thing with that is it's pre-planned. So you have an idea of where it is you want to go. And if it isn't something normal, you want to make sure it's flagged off so everybody understands where you're going. Out in the field, a flank is usually a quieter part of the fire. It's on the sides, either the left or the right of the most active part of the fire, which is what the next one down we call the head of the fire. That's the most rapid spreading. And that's kind of the direction the fire's taking. And the flank, it's usually generally slowly working its way out. Yeah, you'll hear talk of safety zones, excuse me. A lot of times you'll even see them flagged out and marked out, and the goal with the safety zone is that's an area where you can go, you can congregate, and the theory is that you would never have to deploy a fire shelter to protect yourself in this zone. It's large enough, and they've taken into account the topography, the vegetation, everything there. So it should be an area where you can get in the middle of it. I always recommend staying in your vehicle, but that's a safety zone, is a pre-designated area. The big one we see in here all the time right now is spotting. Basically, that's an ember or a firebrand, depending on what you call it. The wind picks these things up and carries them, and it gets out beyond the front or the head of the fire. And again, depending on the winds, we're seeing these things popping 1.5 miles ahead of the main fire. So you're getting little fires starting. And as you know, if you're up in a canyon or if you're somewhere doing an evacuation, the last thing you want to hear is something coming over the radio. We have spotting down canyon or spotting here. That just means the wind is picked up and we're having aggressive fire behavior. It's showing up in places where it shouldn't be. I always throw a strike team in there just because you're going to hear that a lot on the radios. The biggest thing with the strike team, it means there's a whole bunch of engines coming in your direction potentially. And if you're on a small road, you're going to have 5 engines and a battalion chief vehicle, so a Suburban or a pickup truck. Just be aware, again, if you hear that's coming up your road, your area, you may have limited access to get out because we don't build small fire engines. They take up a lot of road. Trigger point, I'm told that's actually not an acceptable term to use anymore, which is probably why I still used it. It's a management point, I believe was the nicer phrase for it, but I'm still going with trigger point because I'm going to honestly, I'm just told that's what sticks in my head. I got to stick with it. It's a geographic point or a specific time where if the fire hits this area, we need to do this. Or if it's been an hour, we need to do this. It could be check-ins. It could be we're going to have plan B needs to go into effect, but it's things that you're kind of pre-planning and making sure that your troops in the field know what's going on. And then everybody's favorite, and it's what drives this entire conversation, is the WUI, or the Wildland Urban Interface. And that's basically where all of our houses are now, it seems. Everybody's building up into the wildland. So it's that interface zone where you've got that house buried in the wood because nobody wants to live in the city. And we all know how tough it is to get in there and get out of there. So that's just kind of one or a group of, I think, kind of the more relevant terms just to have in the back of your head. So that way, if you hear these things over the radio, you're not in the dark about what's coming on. So, PPE. So everyone has their own uniform. They have their, what you're normally going to wear. Obviously, I didn't go into, hey, you should probably put pants on. You should probably wear your boots. I'm hoping we all are going to show up dressed accordingly, but it's those added little things that sometimes we forget about. Because again, this isn't your normal search and rescue response. You guys are kind of, everyone's dialed. You're like, okay, we grab our pack, we're hiking, we're doing this. This is, for the most part, at least from my perspective and from what I've done with the search and rescue team, you're vehicle based for the most part. There's a car close, you're working off of driveways, roads. Unless you happen to be doing a trail rescue at the same time in the area of the fire, we're kind of looking at evacuations. The big issue, the biggest thing, and the thing that we see that misses the most, and I'll be totally honest, the fire guys, are not great at it either. Reflective vests. You're working on the roads. You're going up and down dark driveways, smoky conditions. We all wear our yellow Nomex. I know a lot of the teams have yellow, or it's usually a bright color, but that reflective quality is something that's extremely important to make sure you've got that out there. And I know this is always a battle, and it'll never happen in the fire service. I'll just put it out there because they're actively fighting the fire. So no one's going to put something that's going to melt on top of their Nomex. So it's a tough one. And again, some of the Nomex you can get has built-in reflective bands. Just be thinking high visibility, because the last thing you want to do is deal with an incident within an incident where somebody got hit by a car because everybody's adrenaline's up. Again, tight roads, smoky conditions. So be aware, try and make sure that people know you're out there and they can see you. A lot of times we want to go without our helmets at this point. I would strongly discourage that concept. I know it's not the funnest thing to wear, but when you're up and out there, there's a lot of stuff. When the wind starts blowing, there's stuff that starts flying around. So we really want to pay attention and protect ourselves. Goggles are important. You don't necessarily have to have them on all the time. I know I don't, but you'll find sometimes you're getting in those smoky conditions where safety glasses aren't going to cut it because you're still getting a lot of that smoke in your eyes. So there are a lot of different goggles that'll actually seal and really help you out. Some sort of dust mask, bandana, anything to keep that smoke out of your lungs. Again, I know nobody wants to wear it. I know nobody wants, we're over COVID. Nobody wants to ever put a mask on again as long as they live. But we really want to protect our lungs. I probably don't need to go into the health part of it here too much, but have that mask, use that mask. And I don't know where all teams are now, but I know locally everybody's got a radio. For me, that is part of your personal protective equipment. You need to have that radio and have it on you. You're either monitoring your frequencies, or depending on how your teams lay out, maybe you're the one monitoring the local fire channel, whatever it might be. Have that communication, because when things go south, you want to be able to get to somebody, and you don't want to be fumbling around figuring out who on your team's got the radio. Everybody should have one when they're out there in the field. And then the last one I put on this list is fire shelters. And this is, I have a lot of question marks on this one, because most of me says absolutely not. You guys shouldn't be you shouldn't be in a position where you're having to wear a fire shelter or have that shelter. And the other part of me says, well, I can recall 2 times when I was on the local team where I was in an area and I'm like, I don't think I'm driving anywhere right now because there's no road right now. I'm going to basically stay at the house with the firefighters because I can't leave. And they've all got shelters and I don't. I guess the big thing is that this is something that your individual teams need to come up with a concept. If you have them, you need to train on them. It does no good to have them buried in your car. They need to be on you when you're out in the field, and you need to be trained in them. Because if you haven't played with one, the time to play with it is not when you need it. Again, I put it out there as food for thought. And again, this is just a partial list as far as what's there. A lot of this, again, like I've said in the beginning, is to make you guys start thinking, what are you carrying? Should you have night vision out there? What else should maybe each individual or team have? But have that conversation with your individual teams, knowing your topography, knowing where you are. What are you missing that should always be in that evacuation pack or anything that has to do with fires? So here's a week-long class in about 5 minutes. Environmental factors. So when we look at the fires, we look at what influences them. So the big 3 when it comes to wildland fires are topography, the fuel, and the weather. So topography, we look at 4 things. There's the slope, the aspect, elevation, and the configuration of the land. So the steeper the slope, the faster the fire is going to run. Fires run uphill faster than they run downhill. They preheat the fuels above them. A 30% slope will run twice as fast as a basically flat land with no wind involved. And if that slope goes up to 50%, it's going to be 4 times faster than the flat. So we have fires that are running twice as fast as a person can run up these hills. So where you are in comparison to the fire is extremely relevant. So slope, the aspect. So what's the face? What's the exposure? Southern aspects, southern facing slopes are the worst. The fuels have been dried out the most. They have more sun exposure throughout the day. So your fuels are more receptive to burning. Your northern side, they're shaded. They're usually a little greener. So if we had to basically generalize, your south facing slopes are the worst. And welcome to Santa Barbara, because that's mostly all we have that goes right up in our communities. Elevation plays part of this. The higher up you go, the less vegetation you have. You take the fuel away from the fire, it's not going to do a whole lot. And then configuration. So when we look at configuration, again, we're talking, is the ground flat? Do we have a slope? Is this a canyon? Canyons are dangerous. So we have two kinds of canyons. We have basically a narrow canyon or a canyon, and then we have a box canyon. A box canyon at the top basically dead ends. There's no saddle. There's nothing going on up there. And we consider those to be chimneys, where you get a fire at the bottom, something goes on in there. As the wind basically gets created by this fire and it starts to work its way uphill, it's similar to a chimney or a flue in your fireplace, where that fire will race up to the top, and then you do not want to be anywhere near the top of a box or a dead end canyon. Narrow canyons are difficult just because of the steep terrain on them. The fire has a tendency to jump from ridge to ridge and ignore the canyon below and burn that out slower. We saw that at the Thomas fire with the wind as that came across Ventura County. The fire jumped from peak to peak in the ridges, and it burned back the canyons later. So you have to be very sensitive to what's going on around you. If you're hearing wind conditions and you're hearing radio traffic that this thing is starting to jump from ridge to ridge, be aware of where your teams are. Stay ahead of this thing. Fuel. Right now, our fuel moistures are still in the 80 percentile. So we've had a couple starts recently. We just had one behind Carpinteria last week where we actually had a turkey vulture get into the 16,000 volt power lines. And he was a little bit charred, but he hit the brush, lit the brush on fire. But based on the fuel moisture, there was tons of grass, tons of stuff, but that fire basically barely got started and stayed within a half acre, even though it was a 3-mile hike after you drove 15 minutes just trying to get to where that thing was. So your fuel moistures are huge. And then again, your type of fuel. Do you have a lot of grasses? Grasses are light and flashy, so they're very receptive to picking up a fire and then running. And then when you get the wind with it, those will take off. Where you start getting big trees and thick timber, that takes a lot to get those things going. So be aware of what's around you. And then weather. Is it hot and sunny? Is the humidity low? What is the wind doing? Wind can be the #1 influencer on what that fire does. Humidity, as far as the weather, it's all about the wind and then the humidity. When the humidity starts to drop, you can expect the activity to drop, to increase on the fire. So relaying that information to people out in the field is huge. So you just got a week-long course. I know it was kind of quick, but the goal is just to kind of give you the high points and hopefully get you guys aware of what's going on around you, just things to look for. So we've done a lot of studies on a lot of fires, and what is being found out, the common factors that we're finding on fatality fires, they're small. They're not always the big fires, or they're off on a quiet part of the fire. It's in light, flashy fuel. So your grasses, things like that, that want to kick up quickly, where the wind shifts, something flares and it's off. Like I was talking about, uphill canyons. So when you're up in the canyons and that thing starts to run on you, there are not a lot of places to go. So you have to be prepared and pre-plan what's going on. And then lastly, flare-ups, unexpected wind shifts. And that's the primary thing that starts to go. When the wind starts to change, Everybody needs, the hair on the back of your neck should go up if the wind starts to change, especially if you notice the wind changes directions. And Santa Barbara and a lot of the coastal communities have that, where in the morning you have your nice onshore breeze, so everything's calm and mellow, and that cool air is rising up the canyons, and then you get that afternoon heat that pushes that back down, and you get that reversal or that wind shift. Usually about 1 to 2:30 in the afternoon, you may see that. Be aware of those things. What are the local conditions if you're going out of county? Find somebody who can talk to you about weather and fire history. What's gone on here before? Just things to pay attention to, because the last thing you want to do is become a statistic. So I had on that slide, I had 10s and 18s. So in the fire service, we have our 10 standing firefighting orders and 18 watchouts. And the whole concept behind these is, these are 10 things that you need to have thinking all the time when you go out. And this doesn't just apply for fires. That's why I kind of kept this in here. This is actually 9 things for you to think about that's going on around you. And if these things start to change, the more of these that you stack. So let's just say there's one of the 9 that you're like, you know, I don't know what the fire's doing. If we look at number 2 on this, okay, that's 1 of 9. But if in the back of your head, you realize that, hey, I'm up to number 4 or 5 of these things that I'm not comfortable with, that's when bad things start to happen. So the first 3 that we look at are all based on fire behavior. Keep informed of fire weather, know what the fire's doing, and base all your actions on current and expected behavior. So it's kind of like if you get, let's just say you're sent out to an area. Hey, I want you to go up to, you know, Nowhere Road and check out those 40 houses. It's a dead end road. Where's the fire? What's the fire expected to do? You know, what are the weather conditions in that area, or the weather conditions coming up? Because the last thing you want to do is go into an area when the fire IC might be saying, oh yeah, that area, we're going to send a bunch of resources up in there and maybe do a burnout on one side of it. So now you have to keep in mind, okay, they're going to bring all this stuff up here. Is that going to trap me? Do they know I'm up here also? And we'll talk about that as part of making sure there's some unified commands so that everybody knows where everybody is. But these 3 are important. And again, they're all based on the fire behavior. And again, so in the fire service, we have a lookout who can kind of put eyes on the fire, and they're always relaying that information to the incident commander or to the division chief. And it's good to kind of be tied into that communication. So, you know, oh, the fire jumped the canyon. Well, wait a minute. It's only 1 canyon away from me now. What does that mean to me? How am I going to go? Where's my route? If that was the way I was going to drive out, what's my alternative? So the first 3 are fire behavior. The next 3 are basically all about safety. And it says fire line safety, but again, this applies to everything. That's why we kept it in there. So what are your escape route safety zones? And does everybody on my team know how we're going to do this? We're going in, how are we coming out? And if plan A doesn't work, what is plan B? And again, if you have a chance, have someone looking out. And for me, the lookout thing we used quite a bit, where we went in a team of 2 or a team of 3. Well, 1 person stayed in the car as we were working roads, and you might be going down a long driveway. That person in the vehicle is listening to radio traffic, and they've got, all they're doing is keeping eyes on what's going on around it. If something were to have changed, they have horns, they have sirens to get people's attention, to get those people on foot back to where they need to be. So paying attention to what's going on around there. And I think the last one applies to, again, everything we do. Be alert, keep calm, think clearly, and act decisively. Not necessarily in that order, but it's not a bad order. And I think some of the biggest things are, and a lot of times we'll have problems with, is that last one is act decisively, because we do want to second guess ourselves. But I think if you pre-plan and you have your plan A, plan B, fires don't wait. So you have to basically come up with your plan of attack and go with it, because time is of the essence when things start to go south. And then the last three, well, it's the almost last three, because the last one is if you line all these up, then you go out and you do what you're supposed to do. But the last three are all about organizational control. And if I probably ask people to raise their hand on if they've ever been on an incident where communications suck, I'm pretty sure I would get everybody to put up both arms and probably a leg or two and maybe jump. Always a problem, but we have to deal with it. So maintaining communication, you know, we talk about with your forces, your supervisor joining forces. So it works on all levels of the incident command system. The IC, you need to be in touch with all of your teams out there. You know, if you're the team leader, you need to be talking to your people in the field. So everybody talks to everybody. Give clear instructions and make sure they're understood. I don't know how many times I probably was given an instruction and maybe I didn't quite hear exactly what I thought I heard, or maybe I thought I heard something and I wasn't quite right. Make sure you know where you're going. And if you don't, if they say, hey, you're going to XYZ road, speak up if you don't know where that is. Get that map, but make sure if you're the leader, make sure leader's intent is given. And if you're getting that leader's intent, make sure you understand it and you get it back to them. And then number 9, it's maintain control of your forces at all time. That goes to, you don't want that maverick out there doing their own thing, somebody who got a little bit of rescue rush or something's going on here. You don't need freelancers going out and becoming a potential incident within an incident. So make sure your people are accounted for and they're doing what they're supposed to do and not on some rogue mission. And then again, number 10 is if you lined up everything above, then you go out there and aggressively do your job. So those are our standing firefighting orders. The 18 watchouts is the same concept. It just goes into little bits and pieces of things in it. And again, the reason that these lists have been created is because this is where we find failures happen. So fire not scouted or sized up in a country not seen in daylight. So if you don't know where you are topography wise, or let's just say you get mutual aid somewhere and you show up in the middle of the night, so you have no idea where you are, you haven't seen what's around you, maybe you got to look at a map, or well, at this point you can probably Google it and figure out a good idea close, but you're still not that familiar with it. Make sure you have an understanding of where you are, what's going on around you, and where can you go if things go south. We talked about safety zones, unfamiliar with weather, local factors. It's always, again, if you're going somewhere where you're not familiar, talk to the locals. They'll give you the rundown of what's going on. Or if you're new to a team, or you've just moved to an area and you're new to that team, find out what's going on, get some history, figure out, you know, Santa Barbara, when we get to September, October, November, we get sundowners. It's local knowledge. We know they're going to be that reversal and hot air is going to come off the mountain if that's what's happening those weeks. Again, we kind of talked about uninformed on strategies and tactics, instructions assignment not clear. It's kind of, a lot of them are the same, which usually means they're important. If you hear something more than once or twice in the slide, or if the instructor's bouncing their foot, that's a test question. We're not going to have the test question. So just things to think about. We go into communication again. So some of them don't apply, we're not constructing line or building fire line downhill, but the concept with, if there's fire below you, you need to be paying attention to that. Where's your road out? We talked about how fire goes fast uphill. Be cognizant of where that fire is. If you're walking a driveway and you can see there's fire in the canyon below you, where's it going to go? We're going to kind of flip the last ones because I hope you guys aren't fighting fire also. If you do, then yes, have a fire shelter. Rolling material can be an issue when you're driving or on canyons or mountain roads and there's burning happening above, or maybe it's burned the day before, rock fall, things like that. Be cognizant. Again, things like to come downhill at that point. If the weather starts getting hotter and drier and the wind starts changing direction, these are big things to open your eyes and look around for, because then you'll see spotting. And my favorite, and I don't know why it is, and I always kind of laugh at it, but yeah, don't take a nap near the fire line. It just seems weird we have to write this one in there, but it's in there for a reason. Try and keep us moving along here. So some of the hazards we have, and one that people forget quite a bit, is both mental and physical fatigue on your team. It's hot out there. You're usually working in the night. Things are going on. So take stock of your team and be honest with yourself and with your team leaders. If you need a break, if you need water, make sure you're drinking. Things like that. Vehicles. Hopefully your vehicles are in good condition. Sometimes there's vehicle failure, but I also talk about vehicles we're talking because we have poor access, narrow roads. And again, like I said, fire engines are not small. They take up a lot of territory on the roads. So just be aware, drive slow, have all your lights on. You don't need your siren all the time because that would be really annoying, really fast. But have your lights on, make sure people can see you're out there. If you're working in an area and you know they're aircraft, pay attention for that. They're mostly dropping things and it's either water or retardant. If you're in an area with fire retardant and you've never met fire retardant before, I'm going to tell you, it is slicker than snot. So if you encounter it when you suddenly are on a turn on a road, that's not where you want to learn how to drive on fire retardant. So pay attention to if there's aircraft in the area and what they're dropping. Animals can be interesting. I know we've done evacuations where we've had to mark an area because there was a particularly mean goat on the property and he was not happy to see us at all. But be aware, if we're in the wildland urban interface, it wouldn't be uncommon for a bear, could be a mountain lion. All of those things are getting pushed out. So just pay attention to what's going on there. And they're not potentially as friendly as the ones you see in the cartoons. Electrical power lines, if they're down, treat them as energized and you have to basically stay away. So that's something that comes into play if you're trying to get in or out of an area. Once those power lines come down, those roads are done. What is your other alternative? If you're walking and doing evacuations, a lot of these homes up in the urban interface don't have natural gas. They're running on propane tanks, and propane tanks in the wrong conditions go boom. So just things to pay attention for as you're moving around. If you see a big white 500-gallon tank and it's getting warm in your area, that's not where you want to be anymore. And again, we talked about changing fire conditions. Human factors. A lot of times that's poor decision making, and it's not necessarily on you. It could be on something around you that you're suddenly directly affected by. So pay attention to your teams around you, and just check in on each other. Again, sometimes we make mistakes, but we want it to be basically a teaching moment and not a regrettable moment. So pay attention to what's going on around you. Best practices. So everybody probably already has a role that they've got set up here. And if you don't, at least at the incident commander level, I would hope that these are in place. There should be pre-planning. Fire shouldn't be okay, we're going to figure this out as we do it kind of approach. So there should be a pre-plan. Know what your role is. Hopefully everybody goes into some form of unified command. I know in the past, search and rescue always, at least in our area, always used to be like this little island over here, but you really need to be in the mix to understand what is the big picture, what is fire doing, you know, who else is out there, what are all the players, and you may not necessarily have a say in what's going on. If you're under the sheriff department, they may have their person in there, but it's good to get a person in there with eyes and ears to at least know what's happening and relay that information. What are the frequencies? Again, area familiarization, and then specialized equipment. So how do you track your people? How do you know where you've been? Are you flagging houses? Do you have tracking software where you can go in and it goes immediately down to the command post and they can figure out who you've evacuated, who you haven't? Do you carry chainsaws? How are you going to get out if something drops on the road in front of you? Is that a good thing to have, a bad thing to have? I kind of recommend, there are a lot of frequencies out there. There's At least in our area, the sheriff is on an ultra high frequency. Fire is on very high. So we have UHF and VHF. Can you talk to somebody? Can you hear everybody in case things are going there? Do you have sat phones in case you're out in an area where everything else gives up? Some teams I've heard carry what's called a hot stick, where it'll detect energized wires, where if there's wires down on the road, they get out of the car and they actually will go, and if you get close to it, the stick will tell you that there's power in there. That's a pretty scary concept, because you could step out of that car and realize it's already too late. You probably shouldn't have gotten out of the car, but you may not get to make that choice twice. I know they're out there. I know a lot of engines stopped carrying them because you treat all lines like they're live, because the last thing you want to do is get electrocuted. And then I put others because there's always stuff on the market. There's things changing. This is just kind of a, hey, take stock on where your team is, what you have out there. Talk to other teams. What are they using? I'm pretty sure Santa Barbara, you guys have a tracking software you have for a couple of years. It's what works for your area, and just kind of reach out and try and see what's there, to be abreast of new technology. Don't be afraid of technology. I am, but you guys shouldn't be totally afraid of it. I'm making Zoom work, so I'm pretty stoked that I've gotten this far through the PowerPoint, and Carrie hasn't had to yell at me. So you're going to meet people. Obviously, you're out there. If you're doing evacuations, you're going to be out there talking to people. Remember, this is potentially the worst day of their life. So they're frightened, they're anxious, they're concerned. They're probably not thinking 100% straight, and they're going to be stressed. You can't make them leave unless the rules have changed, and I would check with your locals, but I know I can't physically make someone leave. So if they stay, what are your policies, procedures? Make sure you have this stuff so you can document properly. Hey, somebody is at this address, nobody's at this address. I used to tell people who were going to stay, okay, I get it. Could you give me your next of kin's information so I can save everybody some time in case things go bad? Maybe that wasn't the right thing to say, but some people left after that. So I don't know, maybe it was a good thing, maybe a bad thing. Things you can tell them if they have decided they are going to stay and there's nothing they can do, and they ask you, or for your own home even, close all your windows, close all your exterior doors, remove drapes, especially light ones, that when the radiant heat gets up to your windows, it may not break your windows, but if you have nice lace cool curtains on the inside and the heat hits those windows, those curtains light on fire. Now your house is on fire from the inside out, and that usually doesn't go well. You can tell people, close all your inside doors. This way, if something does, if you have a window failure or something happens on that leading edge of the fire, you've compartmentalized it at least. The fire's not just going to go through the whole house. It's going to have to slowly work its way through, and you're buying time. If you have a gas meter or a propane tank, turn it off. Leave the electricity on. Don't go shutting off the electric meters. There's no point in doing that one. If you have an electric garage door opener, there's usually a manual disconnect. Disconnect it. Because if and when the power goes out, it gives us the ability to get your door open and help you. Or if you've stayed, you can open your door without power. And then again, if you're leaving, staying, either way, we always suggest leaving the door unlocked. This way, we don't have to break your door down if we actually need to gain access or entry to your home. And if you leave a porch light on, it always at least helps us figure out where the house is down the dark road. That's kind of what I had to just get your brains moving and thinking, and hopefully I didn't put all of you to sleep. A third of you I'm okay with, but not all of you. And I can't tell if you're asleep either way because everybody's muted. And if you're snoring, I don't really know. But this is my contact information. So if you're too shy to ask a question right now, or in a week you think of something and you think I might have some help for you, you can email me. That's my department cell phone. You can call me, preferably during normal hours, but I'll probably answer it almost any time. If there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to try and give you an answer.
So,
Great.
so, I'm sorry, I interrupt someone? No. So Mike, sticking with driving through neighborhoods for a minute,
Yep.
driving over a fire hose, good or bad? Is that it? Can we do that?
That's a bad idea. So if the hose is flat and it's not pressurized, so it just looks like a flat hose on the ground, yes, you can drive over that. Not a
Mhm.
problem. If that hose is nice and pressurized and looks fat, it's a bad thing to drive over it because there's a chance you're going to break it. If they're flowing water on either end, when you do that, you're going to load their pump up, and their pump just went from going 100 gallons a minute to 0. And pumps don't like that sometimes. If there's nobody around to talk to and you can find a piece of wood or something to put on either side of the hose and kind of create a bridge, essentially, it's not the greatest idea. They make hose bridges, but it's bad to run overcharged hoses.
Okay. And then you talked about fos check being, slick, and the time to learn how to drive on it is not during. However, there may be the scenario where that's your only way out, right? So it's just a matter of an awareness. So I wanted to ask about fos check or water drops when you're maybe doing a trail rescue and fire has changed and you're trying to make your exit, but you notice that aircraft overhead. What are some considerations you need to do if you're not near a vehicle? And also what that does to the terrain, like rocks or even just the trail.
So depending on what it is, you're going to do the same thing either way, but water hurts more than fos check. I don't know why. I think maybe the fos check guys are higher up in the helicopter. I don't know what it is, but I've been hit by both, and water hurts more. If you're carrying tools, things like that, you want to put them down, set everything away from yourself. If it's coming, whatever way it's coming towards you, and you're in the zone of your drop and you're not going to be able to get out of it, if you can get on the radio to try and get someone to tell air attack, maybe they don't even know you're in the area, but lay down. You want your feet facing wherever this drop is coming from. And you're going to tuck your head and you're going to protect your head. It will break tree limbs potentially, depending on how low they are. It will dislodge rocks. So you want to look at what's around you. If you can be in an open area, it's best. Hopefully they'll see you and go, yeah, I probably shouldn't do it. Or that might egg them on, depending on who it is. They might go, oh, search and rescue, I could get these guys wet. Probably not going to do that, but feet towards the drop, on the ground. Tools are things that if you dropped them and they hit you, they're going to hurt you. Set everything away from you in a little catch, and then you're just going to ride it out.
Okay, thank you.
And the driving conditions, it's somewhere driving between fresh water, a fresh rain that's kicking the oil off the ground, and ice. So you can drive through it. It's slow going. Just be aware if they've dropped it on a turn, don't go blasting through that turn. There's a good chance you're going to slide through that turn. And you do want to wash that stuff off as soon as you can. If you have a white car, it won't be that white afterwards if you leave it on there for too long. So definitely wash that stuff off. It may look cool and everybody's like, oh, you were in the fire, but it's not great for the car.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have any other questions?
I'm just assuming there are people out there. I actually have no concept.
There's people out there.
And I know I'm not looking at my camera because I'm always looking over here at the people I can see on the side of my screen, but what are you going to do?
Hey, Michael, this is Brad Neer from Seattle Mountain Rescue. Just wanted to say thanks. There was a lot of terminology in this presentation that I've heard on a lot of SAR missions in Washington State that I wasn't necessarily familiar with, and that was super helpful. Unfortunately, Washington might be a little bit more of a fire incident state in the future. So this is really helpful. There's a lot of conversations in SAR and the Pacific Northwest about how to deal with this, because we've got a lot of fires coming down from Canada and things. And, Washington has a lot of trees and a lot of ability for that. So just want to say thanks. That was a really good presentation.
Well, you're very welcome. And Carrie, feel free to share this PowerPoint. You can give it out to whoever may want it. I don't know if it'll help or hurt them, but
Yeah, I've already had a request for a copy, so I'll get that.
yeah,
from
you can do whatever you need with it. I have a longer version of it too. I saved you guys probably sleeping through the fire behavior portion of it, but there's a lot of good information out there. NWCG, they put out a lot of guidebooks, videos, trainings about, it's all about wildland with that group. So if you were to Google NWCG trainings, you'd see a lot of stuff up there too that may add to this.
Great, thank you, Mike. It looks like we're done for the evening. So thank you again so much for your time and knowledge in this space. It's really appreciated. Like the gentleman mentioned from Seattle Rescue, there's other areas that are beginning to have new experience with wildfires that maybe typically weren't there before in their area. So I think this is important and timely information. Again, thank you for your time.
Absolutely, anytime. And yeah, every state's getting hit a little harder every year, it seems. I was in 2 years ago, I was in Washington for a fire. I was in Oregon. I was in New Mexico last year. Everybody just seems to be getting hit by the same challenges, and it's all at the same time sometimes. So resources get spread thin. So just hang in there. And the biggest thing is be heads up, keep your head on a swivel. And something that I was taught long ago is the mountain doesn't care what certifications you carry. And that applies to everything. I don't care how many certs you have. If you're not paying attention, strange things can happen. So be safe, be prepared. Again, if anybody has more for me, you could always reach out.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Have a good evening.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.